I caught my dilly in my husband's bed a week before we signed the divorce papers. I pretended not to see, then set a hidden camera and signed the papers. In court, I played the footage and watched them both crumble. Now every last piece of property is mine. You old hag, what are you even still doing here? Blind in one eye, can't lift a spoon without shaking, and still you have the nerve to meddle in things that do not concern you? Why don't you check yourself into a home already? Save us the space. That was Mira, my daughter-in-law, or, as I had started to call her in my mind, my curse in heels. I sat at the head of the table, the seat I had occupied in this house for over 3 decades. But that night, I might as well have been furniture. The roast chicken in front of me had gone dry. The salad was untouched. The room was lit by the overhead pendant lamp, but I could feel only the shadows and the cold. Luke, my husband, sat across from Mira, not beside me. He stirred his wine with the stem of his fork, his eyes never meeting mine. My son, Tom, was thousands of miles away on a business trip in Tokyo. It was just the 3 of us. Correction, it was 2 against 1. I mean, Laura, Mira continued, swirling her wineglass with a smile like a blade. No one's asking you to disappear, just fade out a little. Let us live. Isn't it time? Luke didn't interrupt. He didn't even raise an eyebrow. I waited a full 10 seconds. Nothing. I looked down at my plate. The peas I had scooped onto it out of politeness were now stone cold. My hands, folded on my lap, were shaking just a little. Age? Maybe, but more likely, fury. I stood. Slowly. The room fell quiet, but not out of respect. Out of mockery dressed as silence. A photo album on the sideboard slipped from a careless elbow. Mira's, I suspected, and thudded open on the tile floor. I bent down to pick it up, and there it was, the wedding day. Mira, glowing in the lace dress I had paid for, holding my son's arm like it was a trophy. Me? I was in the corner of the frame, half cut off, holding a bouquet of lilies and a too small smile. I picked it up and dusted off the edge. A tear, not from my eye, but from my memory, slid down the plastic cover. I'll be upstairs, I said, voice steady. Watch your step, Grandma's shadow, Mira laughed. Wouldn't want you to break a hip and linger even longer. Luke chuckled. He actually chuckled. As if she'd told a clever joke at a bar, not insulted the woman who had kept him fed and clothed for nearly 40 years. I climbed the stairs without a word. Upstairs, the hallway was dim. I passed the guest bedroom, the one Luke had been sleeping in for 3 months now. He had claimed it was due to my snoring, but I knew it was something else. I just didn't know how deep the rot had spread. I reached our old bedroom. Mine now, really. I opened the top drawer of the antique nightstand, the one Luke's mother had given us as a wedding gift. Under a layer of scarves and loose pens was a black box, no bigger than a matchbook. The camera. 2 weeks ago I had driven 3 towns over to buy it. I told the store clerk it was for checking on the housekeeper. He didn't ask questions. I placed it carefully behind the curtain rod bracket, facing the hallway. The exact hallway where I had seen too many glances, too many hands brushing accidentally, too many silences when I walked in a room. I knew something had been happening. Luke had stopped kissing my forehead. Mira had stopped pretending to tolerate me. The house felt thick with a smell I couldn't name, like sweat and secrets. I sat on the bed and opened the photo album again. Page after page of a life I had stitched together. I had worn every role: wife, mother, cook, nurse, referee, mediator, and now scapegoat. I closed the album. I tucked it back into the drawer. Downstairs I heard clinking glasses and Luke's voice, low, relaxed. Then Mira's laugh, high and ringing like a bell announcing something wicked. I didn't cry, not yet, but I whispered to the dark, "They want me invisible. Let them forget I'm watching." And I pressed record. The day after that dinner I began to rewind everything in my mind, the glances, the silences, the little gestures that had never sat right with me. I remembered it clearly now. 3 months ago, Luke had come into the kitchen for a glass of water and found Mira already there, wearing one of those slinky robes she liked to parade around in when Tom was out. I had walked in just in time to catch the moment her hand grazed his as he reached for the same glass. They both froze for a beat too long. "You should really keep your eyes off your son's wife," I had said casually, brushing past. Luke had only chuckled. "Huh, you're being dramatic, Laura. She's just comfortable around us. Us, not me. Us. Then, there was the afternoon I came home early from the library. Mira was in Luke's study, helping him organize paperwork. She was sitting too close. His chair had been turned to face hers. When I cleared my throat at the doorway, they sprang apart like teenagers caught in a lie. "Mom, please," Mira had laughed. "Luke was just helping me figure out the insurance folder. You know how confusing those things are." Luke didn't even try to explain. And Tom, sweet, trusting Tom, was halfway across the world in Tokyo, managing a major merger for his firm. He checked in every few days, but his voice was always rushed, full of updates and jet lag. I did not want to ruin his focus, not unless I was certain. So I decided I would become certain. I waited until the house was empty one afternoon. Luke had gone to a golf tournament with some of his old business partners, and Mira had taken a personal spa day. I took the opportunity to retrieve the camera again. I chose the guest room, Luke's new room, where Mira had been visiting a little too often. I placed the camera at the top corner of the wardrobe, nestled between a row of unused baseball caps. It had a clear, unobstructed view of the bed and door. Perfect. I checked the feed on my tablet. Live stream clear, sound working, battery full. I felt like a spy in my own home, and it should have made me sad, but honestly, it made me feel alive. Back in my own room, I sat on the edge of the bed and looked down at the stack of papers Luke had handed me a week ago, our divorce agreement. He had been quiet about it, almost polite, said we had grown apart, said it would be cleaner this way, said I could keep a comfortable allowance and he would move some assets around. What he meant was, "Here's your bribe, now disappear." I signed the papers with a hand steadier than I expected. My heart was breaking, yes, but not because I was losing Luke. I had lost him long ago. It was because of the betrayal behind it, the insult, the assumption that I would go quietly, like a worn-out coat hung on a nail. When I finished signing, I walked to the mirror. I stared at myself, 68 years old, wrinkles like fine pencil marks along my eyes, hair graying but not gone, and eyes sharper than anyone had bothered to notice. I whispered to my reflection, let's give them a performance worth remembering. Downstairs, the front door creaked open. I heard Mira's voice float through the hallway, humming. I checked the tablet. Camera, on. Memory, recording. I sat in my rocking chair and picked up my knitting. I was making a scarf for a child I had not met. Tom's and Mira's first, whenever they decided to start a family. A future I no longer prayed for. The yarn moved beneath my fingers, but my eyes were locked on the hallway, waiting for truth to come upstairs. It happened on a Wednesday. I remember the weather because I had hung the sheets outside. It was bright, with just enough breeze to make the linens dance. A quiet day, the kind of day that betrays you. Luke had told me he was going into town. Mira said she was meeting a friend for coffee, but I forgot my reading glasses and came back unexpectedly from the pharmacy. As I climbed the stairs, something felt off. A sound, muffled. Not the television, not voices in conversation. No, I opened the guest room door. There they were, Luke and Mira, in our bed, my bed. His hands were on her bare waist, her legs twisted in sheets that I had folded 2 days ago. Time froze. Luke's head snapped toward me. Mira gasped, clutching the blanket around her. "What the hell is she doing here?" she shrieked. I could not speak. My throat tightened like it had swallowed a rock. My knees buckled slightly, but I held on to the doorframe. Luke rushed toward me, not to apologize, not even to explain, but to shove me back out the door. "Laura, wait, it's not what you think," he barked, his voice sharp and shaking. "You shouldn't have seen this." My heel caught the edge of the hallway rug. I stumbled backward. My head cracked against the corner of the closet door. The pain was sharp and instant. I fell to the ground, dazed. The air knocked from my lungs. Mira stood in the doorway, wild-eyed and furious. "Do something, Luke," she yelled. "She'll ruin everything." Luke crouched beside me. "Laura, listen," he said, his voice suddenly low, urgent. "You need to calm down. We'll talk about this later. But right now you need to rest. You're confused. You're not well." I looked into his eyes. The same eyes that had once looked at me with love. They were cold now, hollow, focused only on damage control. They dragged me, yes, dragged me, down the stairs, into the basement. The door creaked open, and I felt the rush of damp, musty air. "You'll be okay here," Luke said, as if he were doing me a favor. Mira threw an old blanket at me and slammed the door. The lock clicked, and I was alone. The basement was cold, darker than I remembered. Boxes of old decorations, tools, forgotten things surrounded me like witnesses too scared to speak. My head throbbed. My arms ached. I curled up on the cold floor, the blanket barely covering my legs. They had locked me in. My husband and my daughter-in-law. Two people I had once cooked for, prayed for, defended. I lay in silence. No screaming, no pounding on the walls. Just breathing. Shallow, steady breathing. And then I whispered, so quietly, even I could barely hear it. The lips of my child, the hands of my husband. "You are killing the last piece of me. But not all of me. Not yet." From the basement I could hear them. Their voices drifted down through the thin vent in the ceiling. Luke's low and calculating, Mira's sharp and impatient. "She's going to tell Tom," Mira hissed. "She's not going to tell anyone," Luke said, his voice calm, too calm. "She hit her head, she's delusional. All we have to do is file the paperwork. The hospital will do the rest." "What do we tell the court?" Mira asked. "That she's unstable? That she wandered into the room accusing us of things that never happened? That she's been seeing things since the accident last year? They were going to have me declared mentally incompetent, lock me away in a home, remove me as a legal threat. And then they would have everything. My name off the accounts, off the deed, out of the picture." I curled tighter beneath the old blanket and bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. My hands trembled, but I was not done. Not yet. I waited until I could no longer hear their voices above. Then I crawled to the far corner of the basement, behind the stack of winter coats no one had touched in years. I reached behind a loose panel in the wall, my own hiding place, prepared long ago when I started to suspect something was wrong. And there it was. A tiny black flip phone. A burner, charged, still on, just one purpose. I opened it with stiff fingers and typed, "Tom, if you're reading this, you must come home. Mira and your father are having an affair. I caught them. They locked me in the basement. They are planning to fake my medical records and commit me. I think they want me gone, for good. Please, son, come home. SOS. I hit send. I stared at the screen, watching the tiny bark crawl across. Sent. 3:02 a.m. And then I prayed. Not aloud, not dramatically, just a quiet plea to whoever might still listen. Let my son see this. Let him believe me. Let me survive long enough to see the look in their eyes when the door opens. Somewhere, miles away, my son's phone vibrated on a nightstand. The sound of a car door slamming woke me. Not the usual kind, this was fast, sharp, purposeful. Footsteps on gravel, then silence. Then more steps, the side entrance creaked open, and then a voice. "Mom?" I shot up, banging my shoulder on the edge of an old shelf. My heart surged. "Tom?" I called, my voice barely a rasp. I scrambled toward the door and started pounding, yelling his name, louder. He heard. I knew he did. "Where is she?" he shouted upstairs. "Where the hell is my mother?" I heard scrambling, Mira yelling something incoherent, then Tom's voice again, closer now. "Mom, hang on. I've got you." I heard the key fumble in the lock, then finally the bolt gave way. The door creaked open and light streamed in like a second chance. My son stood there, disheveled, pale, his eyes wet with shock and rage. "Mom!" He knelt beside me, helped me to my feet like I was made of glass. I clung to his shoulder, steadied by something stronger than bones. "She's fine," Luke's voice rang from above. "She just needed rest." "She was hallucinating," Mira added quickly. "We were going to get her help. Tom was already filming. His phone was up, pointed at both of them. You were going to what? Lock her in a basement until she lost her mind completely?" "No," Mira snapped. "That's not how it was," Luke's voice cracked. "Tom, son, you don't understand. I understand enough," Tom said, his voice steady as he filmed. "I understand you slept with my wife and then tried to erase my mother. Mira burst into tears, but it was hollow, her mascara running like mud. I stood straighter. My hair was wild, my blouse stained from the dust, but my spine was made of steel. Tom turned to me, lowered his phone for a moment. "Mom, what do you want to do?" I looked at them, Mira trembling in fake grief, and Luke unable to meet my eyes. Then I turned to Tom and said quietly, "I don't need their tears. I need the truth to have weight. And today, it does." That was the moment. The moment everything shifted, not with screaming, but with proof. 3 weeks later, we were in court. Tom had flown back and forth between legal appointments and meetings with our attorney, gathering every bit of evidence, the recordings, the texts, the basement photos, and of course, the footage. I had signed the documents myself. A formal civil suit against Luke and Mira for unlawful imprisonment, elder abuse, and adultery. The courtroom was packed. Family law cases usually don't draw a crowd, but betrayal like this has a scent, and people follow it. Mira sat at the defense table in a sleek black blazer and pearls too big for her neck. Luke beside her, grayer than I remembered, tapping his thumb against the table edge like it could save him. Tom sat between me and the lawyer. He never took his hand off my arm. The judge entered. The session began. Opening statement were brief. Our side stuck to the facts. Locked basement door, hidden phone, the affair, the footage. Their side denied everything. Confusion, misunderstanding, a difficult time for the family. And then the moment came. Our lawyer stood and said, "Your Honor, with your permission, the plaintiff would like to introduce video evidence into the record." The judge nodded. "Proceed." Tom reached into the case folder and slid over a flash drive. The screen in the courtroom flickered. First a quiet view of the guest room, the bedding, the light afternoon shadows. Then the door opened. Luke entered, then Mira, laughing, kissing. He lifted her by the waist and tossed her onto the bed. No one spoke in the courtroom. The footage wasn't graphic, but it didn't have to be. What it showed was enough. Luke's shirt came off. Mira's laughter rang through the speaker system. And then, the moment I walked in, the gasp, the push. The frame shook as I hit the ground, gasps from the courtroom. Someone covered their mouth. Mira leapt up from her seat and bolted out the side exit, her heels echoing down the hall. Luke just stared at the floor. The judge called a brief recess. Tom turned to me. His eyes were damp. He stood and helped me up from the bench. And right there, in front of everyone, he wrapped his arms around me. I had not felt his embrace like that since he was a boy. When court resumed, our lawyer stood and said, "Your Honor, the tape says more than I ever could. My client is not delusional, she's not unstable, she is a mother, a wife, and a victim of betrayal so deep it cuts through blood and bone. We do not seek revenge today, we seek justice, and she deserves every inch of it." The judge agreed. Luke was ordered to relinquish all shared property, and Mira's claims were dismissed entirely. Every last piece of what they tried to steal was mine. Not because I screamed, but because I endured. The judge's voice rang steady through the courtroom. In light of the evidence presented, this court finds the defendants, Luke Harrison and Mira Harrison, responsible for unlawful confinement and abuse, and hereby transfers all jointly held assets, including the primary residence and business interests, to the plaintiff, Laura Harrison. There was no gasp from the defense, just silence, dead and heavy. Luke kept his eyes on the floor, his hands clenched. Mira never returned to the courtroom. Her seat remained empty, just like her promises. I looked down at my hands, wrinkled, veined, strong. These were the same hands that once cooked for both of them, helped raise their child, cleaned up after their messes, and now held the deed to the very home they tried to bury me beneath. Tom stepped forward during the proceedings and requested custody of their son, Ethan. A separate hearing would follow, but the judge made note of the emotional instability shown by Mira and her documented abuse of his mother. Everything had shifted. Their illusion of power had evaporated, leaving only their guilt to echo between them. As the gavel came down, finalizing the ruling, I did not smile. I did not cry. I stood and gathered my purse. Outside the courthouse, a few local reporters gathered, tipped off by the whispers of a case more cinematic than the movies. One young reporter, probably younger than my grandson, lifted his mic and asked gently, Mrs. Harrison, any words for those watching? I looked at him, his fresh eyes, his trembling mic, the way he waited for me to either collapse or explode. Instead, I straightened my coat, stepped closer to the camera, and spoke softly. I did not come here for revenge. I came to remind them that the voiceless can speak, and sometimes the one they call a burden is the only one holding the key. He blinked, stunned by the calm. I turned and walked away. Behind me, the courthouse loomed tall and cold, but I did not feel small anymore. They took so much from me, my trust, my home, my dignity, but I took it back, every single piece. And I did it without screaming, because wisdom, when sharpened, cuts deeper than any scream ever could. The first night back in the house was the hardest, not because it felt haunted, but because it no longer did. The memories were still there, but they no longer held me hostage. They had become quiet photographs in the hallway, things to look at, not live in. I walked through each room with a soft cloth and a quiet heart. Dust had settled in the corners like old memories, waiting to be swept out. I took my time. I wiped every surface as though erasing the parts of myself that had been ignored, dismissed, or overlooked. I cleaned not for company, but for clarity. I scrubbed the kitchen where I used to cook for Luke's, every craving, where Mira would sit pretending to have migraines so she would not have to help. I had boiled her tea. I had fluffed her pillows. I had excused her cruelty. That ended now. I opened every window and let the air in, fresh, salt-heavy Florida air. It clung to my lungs like truth. The house no longer suffocated. It breathed. In the bedroom, once shared with a man I had planned to grow old beside, I stripped the linens. I burned the old sheets. I rearranged the furniture. I moved the dresser so that each morning I would wake up facing the sunrise, not the wall. I changed the locks. Not out of fear, out of finality. The silence in the house no longer echoed. It hummed, like the calm breath of someone who had finally exhaled. I lit a candle, not for mourning, but for marking. A new beginning had begun. The neighbors came, some with casseroles, some with tulips. Many with the sort of apologies that come late but still matter. One woman stood on my porch and said, "We heard things, but we didn't want to believe it. I am so sorry we weren't better." I hugged her anyway. Online, something strange and beautiful happened. Tom had shared a small part of my story on his account, just a few lines about elder abuse and the power of staying observant. But the post spread like wildfire. It reached people far beyond Florida. Women wrote to me, mothers, grandmothers, even college students with usernames like Granny Power and Not Your Doormat. They said I reminded them of someone they loved, or someone they lost, or someone they had become and had forgotten how to love. A woman from Georgia mailed me a letter. It was handwritten on rose-scented paper. I thought silence made me safe, but you reminded me, silence only makes them stronger. Thank you, Grandma Laura. It made me cry, but not from pain. I cried because someone out there still thought a grandmother mattered. One morning, while pulling weeds in the front yard, a young woman in a floral blouse approached. She was a local teacher. Her voice was trembling but clear. "Would you speak to my students? They're mostly teenage girls. A lot of them come from homes like you described." I said yes. The school was modest. A few desks missing screws, posters peeling from the walls. But the girls? They had eyes like open books, hungry for stories that told the truth. I stood in front of them and said, "Strength does not always look like fists or fire. Sometimes, strength is an old woman hiding a phone in the floorboards because she knew she had to outsmart two people who thought she was disposable." They laughed. Then they cried. And when I walked out, I felt 10 feet tall. Taller than I had in decades. Tom came every Sunday. He helped me fix the porch swing. We repainted the mailbox. He brought Ethan, who ran into my arms like he had never stopped being my grandson. As if the love never broke, only bent. Ethan asked for stories, not explanations. I told him how I met his grandfather at a fair in 1972, how I danced barefoot in the rain on our third date, how I once ate an entire watermelon with a spoon and a paperback book. He laughed and said, "Grandma, you're so cool." And this time, I believed it. On Sunday afternoons, we sat on the porch with lemonade, just the three of us, a triangle that somehow felt whole again. Tom once looked at me long and quiet and said, "I should have seen it sooner." "You were busy being someone's husband and someone's father," I said, sipping my drink. "Now you just get to be someone's son again." He nodded. That moment didn't need anything more. I kept busy. I joined a support group, not to speak at first, but to listen. Women told stories like my own, of bruises that never showed, of insults shaped like compliments, of inheritances they were never allowed to touch. When I did speak, I did not raise my voice. I simply told the truth. We held each other's silence gently, like heirlooms. Eventually, I started writing short letters, essays, thoughts I had buried beneath the noise for too long. One piece about surviving narcissistic in-laws got published in a local women's journal, then another about the myth of the ungrateful grandma. Soon, people started calling me the grandmother who roared. I laughed. I never roared. I whispered, then proved I was right. My home, once a cage, became a lighthouse. I started hosting Sunday teas. I funded a local workshop for elderly women who wanted to learn tech skills so they could protect themselves and connect with others. I named it the Quiet Network. We were not so quiet anymore. The final piece? Peace. True peace, the kind that does not come from revenge, but from reclaiming your own name. The kind that walks barefoot on cool floors, that sits in silence without flinching. One evening, just before dusk, I sat alone on my porch. The sea breeze carried salt and memory. I sipped the last of my chamomile tea, breathed deep, and looked toward the ocean. The sky was streaked with orange and violet, like bruises healing in the sky. I whispered, "I was once a shadow." But anyone who walks in shadow long enough learns to see where the fire burns brightest. And I smiled, because I had seen the fire. It was mine all along. ___. The summer sun dipped low, turning the porch into a golden haven, and I rocked gently in my chair while Tom sat across from me, the way he used to when he had homework sprawled across his desk and tomorrow's accountability still ahead of him. Now he was different, taller, more measured, wiser. And beside him, a loaf of freshly baked honey cornbread sat in a wicker basket, warm to the touch. He cleared his throat. "Mom, this is Raymond." Then Raymond stepped forward, mid-60s, salt and pepper hair neatly combed, and eyes that carried both grief and kindness. He gave a slight bow of his head before offering me the bread, his hands unwavering. "Thank you," I said, accepting it. "Tom tells me you're a mason." "General contractor," he corrected politely. "We restore old homes up in Savannah. Saw the workshop sign on your front gate and thought, maybe you'd like a fresh loaf." I smiled, touched by the gesture. "That you did." We settled onto the porch together, the horizon aglow with promise. Raymond handed me a slice, warm and fragrant, and when I bit into it, the sweetness reminded me of simpler times. Apple pie cooling by the window, lemonade on scorching afternoons. He leaned back, his gaze drifting to the edge of the garden. "My wife Laura, same as you, used to bake cornbread for me when I was working late, made me feel like I wasn't alone." I set the loaf down. "That's a good woman." "She was," he agreed softly. "Patient, stubborn, kind. She taught me that sharing food is sharing self." I nodded. I'd learned that once too before the walls closed in. Tom cleared his throat. "Raymond told me about the restoration work here. You're thinking of helping Mom redo the front hall?" Raymond smiled. "Only if she'd let me. There's structural damage in the beam above the door. I thought it might be nice to repair it, reinforce it, start fresh." I breathed in. "Let's do it." Tom squeezed my shoulder. The weeks that followed were a gentle dance. Raymond showed up each morning in old work boots and a brown t-shirt, carrying tools and plans. He assessed the front hall, tapped the beam, measured, made notes. We talked while he worked, about sea patterns, about vintage diners, about grief and hope. One afternoon he crouched beside me while I pulled weeds. "That white rose?" he asked, pointing. "Your mother's favorite." I nodded. "She planted it the day Tom was born. It was supposed to be a gift for his bride." Raymond brushed a finger against the petals. "She had good taste." It made me laugh. And then I cried. Because it was true. He didn't flinch. He just sat beside me, quiet and supportive. The restoration began. New beam, fresh paint, a glass transom window above the front door so morning light could flow in. Each nail hammered felt like a small reclamation. By the time they hung the new light fixture, the house felt less like a prison, more like sanctuary. All the while, Tom visited nearly every day. He and Raymond would talk business. Raymond would ask questions about the kitchen layout, about where I keep my favorite teacup, how high to set the new cabinets. Tom would laugh, ask his mom questions, and then join in the conversation. One evening, after the work was done, Raymond invited me to dinner. Just the two of us and a couple of board games and a pot of basil soup made with tomatoes from my garden. We ate at my dining table, and for the first time in years, I felt calm. We talked about books and music, about how laughter sometimes arrives in hidden crevices. I taught him how to roll out biscuits, how to be gentle with dough. He responded by praising my hands, the ones that had stood the test of betrayal and time. "Your hands have stories," he said. "Every line is a chapter." That night, after dinner, Tom watched us with a small smile. I caught his eye and mouthed, "Thank you." The porch was our retreat. Some nights I sat alone, gazing out at the sea. Others, Raymond joined me quietly, joining my slow rock and my slowed heartbeat. We didn't rush anything. Sometimes we just watched the birds come home to roost. On my 72nd birthday, Tom surprised me with family and a small gathering of neighbors. Raymond brought flowers and cornbread again. Ethan presented me with a painting he had made, the white rose, vibrant and alive. Raymond looked around the table, quietly proud. "You did this," he said to me. "All of this." Tears pooled in my eyes, but they were not the tears of sorrow. They were relief, renewal. Later, we stepped onto the porch as dusk settled. I sipped tea, Raymond sipped lemonade, Tom wore that look of a son in awe of his mother. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick, "for seeing me when I thought I'd been erased." Raymond took my hand gently. "There's still a lot of living left in you." I nodded. Maybe. It was true. The fire was still mine, but now it flickered brighter when it illuminated someone else's pathway too. A few days later, Tom and Raymond worked on the new wooden porch swing, a joint project for two people learning how to restore more than homes. Ethan watched, trying to help, but mostly handing tools back and forth. After it was hung, Raymond sat on it first, gently rocking. I joined him. He reached out and tucked a strand of my hair behind my ear. "My house feels like home again," I said. He glanced at me. "Then it is." Tom came out with a camera. "Picture time," he said. Raymond and I sat close. Ethan climbed onto our laps. Tom clicked the button. The flash caught my smile, soft and real and expansive. When Tom showed me the photo, I felt something shift. I saw late nights with tea and knitting, late night calls with friends who found courage to speak, the porch that carried laughter back into my life. And beside me, Raymond's arm looked like shelter. I didn't know what tomorrow would hold, but I knew whatever it brought, I would face it as myself. Not as a burden, not as a victim, but as a woman who still had chapters to write. One evening we gathered by the swing, under string lights that Jasper, the young repairman, helped us install. We shared cupcakes. Ethan told a silly story about school. Raymond stroked my hand. Tom looked at us and said, quietly, "I'm so happy for you, Mom." I looked at Raymond, then Ethan, then Tom, with a swelling heart. "Thank you," I breathed. "All of you." Raymond squeezed my fingers gently. "You deserve all this." I looked toward the horizon, where the sky was bruised into beauty, and whispered to the sea breeze, "I was once a shadow, but anyone who walks in shadow long enough learns to see where the fire burns brightest." And this time, the fire burned for more than me. It burned with possibility, with friends, with new beginnings. The porch light winked on, the swing creaked, and I smiled, because in that moment, home was not just a house. It was this, in shared warmth, in trust rewritten, in the quiet power of being truly seen. And I had a feeling this was just the first page of what came next. Thank you for walking through my story with me. If you have ever felt invisible, discarded, or underestimated, know this. Your silence does not mean surrender, and your age does not make you irrelevant. I am not telling these stories for pity. I tell them because the truth, once buried, has a way of rising, and when it does, it brings light with it. If this story resonated with you, If it reminded you of something unspoken in your own life or someone else's, I invite you to stay with us. Subscribe to Grandma True Stories, where the quietest women finally get to speak, and the world finally listens. Because revenge has no expiration date, and wisdom, it never needed permission.